I'm incredibly excited about our next talk. Naomi Glover is a neuroscientist, founder of Neuro-Informed Ltd, and has over 20 years of experience in translating brain science into practical tools for real-world success. She's going to walk us through a little bit of how to motivate your teams through this change, right? And also really how to ensure that we support our most vital assets, which of course are people. So please join me in welcoming Naomi.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This sounds very loud to me, but is it okay? I have quite a big voice anyway, so I'm going to try and whisper so it doesn't sound like I'm blasting everybody out of here. Thank you so much for inviting me to come along today. And this is a kind of slightly left field keynote in the sense that obviously I'm not coming from a marketing background, I'm coming from a people background and more specifically a brain background. So I'm really interested in understanding what is it that are making the people's brains behave the way that they do, and how can we help people's brains to behave better. And so there's an awful lot that we can learn now from neuroscience that wasn't the case before. I'd be really keen to hear what your biggest challenges are at the moment, just in terms of your team. So this is about your people, not about your marketing, because I can't answer questions on that. That's for Janos and colleagues. But what are the challenges that you're having with your teams or yourselves? So this is about, we know that everything is changing really quickly, and what I see when I go to lots of different organizations is the challenge that is it coming up? Ah, great. Yeah, the pace of change, exactly that. That the pace of change is faster than ever, and people are struggling to keep up, and their brains are struggling to keep up. Understanding, trusting the data, clarity, pace of change. Yeah. Mental health, focus, motivation. Okay, good. Motivation. That's. I'm pleased then, because I'm talking about the right thing. Okay, great. I'm not gonna sort of focus on this too much, but if anybody wants to give me more insights later, I'm always grateful for them. Have a look at this slide. If you've seen it before, please don't tell anybody what it is. Mostly I find that people haven't seen this before. But do you have a sense of what it is? Does anybody have an idea of what this could be? Soup? Anybody else?
Is it econometrics?
Anybody else? You're faking stuff up. A brain? Anybody else? Ah. So the state that you're in at the moment is called experiential blindness. And it's what we have when we come across something that we've never seen before, and our brain is frantically predicting and trying to work out what this is most like. And we can cure experiential blindness very quickly by giving you more information. And our brains learn exceptionally quickly. So within fractions of seconds, your brain is changing, physically changing, chemically changing, and then biologically changing structurally as well. And so then when we go back to a previous scan, you still have, for the most part, most people still find that they can have a sense of what this is. They haven't gone back to that level of experiential blindness that they were in before. And so it's really important, I think, to realize just how fast our brains are changing at the moment. And at the moment, they're having to change faster than ever before, because the pace of change in our society is faster than ever before. So but typically what we find is that while they're doing a lot of research into measurement and all of these things for good reason of what they're going to do with their marketing, what they're not looking at typically is people's brains. And that's understandable because historically we didn't know very much about the behaving brain through life. But that has changed, and it's changed just as dramatically as AI has changed just in the last few years. And so now that we have much, much more information about what our brains are doing, how they're functioning, and what can get in their way, organizations are in a position to be able to do really quite a lot of really useful things with that information. And so it's like having the measurements, but not doing anything with them, as Janos was saying earlier. And he spoke earlier about the importance of curiosity, courage, and creativity. And typically, these are not things that most organizations are measuring or trying to improve. And that typically is because they don't realize that they can. So most organizations have a department for mental health. They don't typically have any departments for cognitive health. And yet, if you remember back to that slide where you were all contributing, most of the challenges that people are having currently are around cognitive health. It's how they focus, it's how they think, it's how they make decisions, it's how they motivate themselves. Now, these are affected by mental health challenges, but they are not the same as mental health challenges. These are cognitive challenges. They're also having emotional challenges about managing emotional flexibility or dysregulation. I'm also aware that you haven't had a break, and typically our brains don't do very well after long periods of information. So I'm really aware that ideally we should have gone for a bit of a break before we do this. So I'm going to go through it as quickly as possible. Then if you've got any questions, you're very welcome to catch me later. So just briefly, when we look at curiosity, courage, and creativity, curiosity is something that we can measure. We can measure all of these things. Now, there are lots of different ways that we can measure these critical success factors for your teams. But there are also things that we can do to improve them. And there are things that will get in their way. And by having your organization recognize what those things are, what are the things that could be a blocker on curiosity or on courage or on creativity, removing those factors, removing the things that can become blockers, and instead putting in some of those key factors that can really help all of the brains in your organization to thrive, is exactly what most organizations are after at the moment, because you want to be working with the best brains rather than with brains that are not functioning very well. So the neuroscience of curiosity is fascinating, and excuse me, I'm not quite sure how. I'm quite sure I turned my watch off earlier. The neuroscience of curiosity has been growing, and you can see that this is not super new information. So typically, it takes about 17 years for research like this to go through from the lab and into people's lives. And what I'm trying to express to people is that that's too slow, because we wouldn't want a 17-year-old mobile phone right now. We wouldn't be able to do anything with it. It would be hopeless. And so we don't want to be in the same situation with our understanding of neuroscience and what we can do with it. We don't want to wait 17 years before we do something really useful with this information. So this is 10-year-old information that shows that when we get really curious about a topic, we're better at learning information about that topic. But we're also better at learning information about completely unrelated materials, which means that if we translate that into something that's actually useful in the workplace, if you've got people and they're struggling to learn something which is quite dry or quite boring and they're not very interested in it, by teaching them something that they're naturally curious about first, they will automatically be grabbing that information, and it's like your brain has formed a vortex. It's sucking in all this extra information, and they're going to get it anyway. That may or may not also be something that you want to use when you're doing marketing. There is, of course, a dark side to neuroscience too, and you can do all sorts of things in terms of manipulating brains to think in a certain way, which I'm sure many of you have already already looked at. But this neuroscience of curiosity is retained over 24 hours. You retain that information better over 24 hours. So even this, and this is 10-year-old information about curiosity in the brain, is still really interesting. And what I find is most organizations are not using this yet. So the World Economic Forum kindly had a look at what businesses' top skill priorities were going to be when we get to 2027. And I was quite interested to see that AI and big data, of course it's on there, but it's at number 3. And what the things that are at number 1 and 2 are actually cognitive skills. And these, again, are the skills, just to emphasize, not that I need to, but that most organizations are not training. They are not training them and they are not measuring them. And mostly they're not measuring them because they don't know that they can be measured. And they're mostly not developing them because they mostly don't realize that they can be developed. So just something to bear in mind, we can measure and develop things like analytical thinking, creative thinking. We can develop resilience and flexibility and agility, agile thinking. We can develop curiosity and lifelong learning and motivation and empathy, and all of these things can be taught and can be developed. I'm very happy to take questions at the end or at any point if you're interested. The workplace stress we know is higher than ever. This has been rocketing. And this is one of those blockers that we know get in the way of all of those factors that Janos was talking about. So it really puts a blocker on curiosity. People get very constantly vigilant when they're under high levels of stress. And the part of their brain that does all of this great planning and thinking and decision making and curiosity pretty much switches off when we're in high levels of stress. So we have to be more proactive. We have to be thinking differently about how people's brains are functioning. And this was just a recent session that I ran where they're asking what people were experiencing. And we had 72% of people feeling overwhelmed and 44% struggling to stay focused and 35% finding it hard to adapt to change. I'm not going to read them all out. But again, what we're seeing is this is a very consistent thing in pretty much every organization that I go into. When we go into what people's top challenges are, typically the biggest challenges used to be anxiety and stress, and they are still there, but we're seeing a lot more brain fog, memory problems, problems with focus, constantly distracted. And that's not surprising because our lives have changed and the technology that we're using has changed, and people spend their days now doing things that distract their brain. So how many people regularly are multitasking? All, at least half, and probably more than half. And we now know that multitasking is toxic for your brain, and it makes it more splintered. It makes you take longer to do the task. You make more mistakes, and you get a feeling of more stress while you're doing it because you're trying to do several things at once. And so we know that the most effective way for you to work your brain is to consistently monotask. So you learn to focus on one task. You do that one task, then you switch effectively and efficiently to the next task. And ideally, you do that with a short brain break, and it can be really quick, less than 5 minutes. And that just helps your brain to rejuvenate and move on to the next task. And this matters, and we can see it measurably. So as I was saying, the parts, this is a really simplified model, obviously. But the frontal lobe, which is responsible for all of these factors that we were talking about, productivity, planning, decision-making, creativity, curiosity, the creative thinking, critical thinking, these are mostly, not exclusively, but mostly processed at the front of the brain. And we now have technologies that can help us to optimize that and measure it. There are loads of things that we can now measure that we didn't used to be able to measure. We can measure stress levels. In fact, one of my colleagues at King's College designed a technology called biostress, where I think they're testing it now with Bupa, or they've been using it with Bupa, to measure people's stress levels throughout the day and over a period of time, so that they understand where people's stress levels are peaking, and they can start understanding how they can address those things. You can measure engagement. Professor Paul Zak, he did a lot of work on understanding engagement and designing technologies that could measure engagement in the moment. We can measure psychological safety. That's really easy. That's a 7-question thing you can ask to your teams, but it's robustly evidenced. We've got brain health indexes that are now being developed, and they have hundreds of thousands of people doing these brain health indexes, and they're seeing that there is a correlation between the data that they're measuring and people's the physical health of their brain, how thick their cortex is, and that can grow and change. There's brilliant news on neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. It used to be thought that our brain pretty much stopped changing in childhood, and after that it was game over. Sorry. No, you can't do anything else now because you're a grown-up. And no, it turns out that our brains continue to change right the way throughout life, and you can continue to develop them. You can continue to improve them. You can make them stronger. You can create neurogenesis, is the growth of new brain cells, new neurons throughout life, which we know is associated with certain things. Some things help you grow more of them. When you grow more of them,